Up next on Inside the SCCA, going solo. Welcome to Inside the SCCA. I'm Brian Bielanski. My guest this weekend, weekend, it's all the same, is Edwin Liu. He is an autocrosser from San Diego. Edwin, San Diego region?
Yes, sir.
All right. I wasn't sure if you were living in San Diego and part of another region or if you were all in on San Diego region. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. So I'm going to hopefully people have seen the little slide I put up to get us the promo slide that shows your first of all, you autocrossed one of the most badass cars out there. And that alone is pretty darn cool. But the way you get back and forth to the track is even more cool. It's and I don't know how you do it, but actually I do know how you do it, and it's really cool, and that's why we're going to talk about it. So
Yeah.
So you have an NSX Acura. What year is it?
It's a 1991.
Okay, a 1991. It's a ton of fun. It's jet black and fast as can be, and every time I see you on social media, you're doing something to it, changing springs, doing this or that. But what caught me off guard, or caught my eye more than anything else, is we were at an autocross at Lake Elsinore, which is one of the more popular spots down here in Southern California for us to do this stuff. Cool little area, and you've got your NSX there. You were already there when I arrived, and behind your car was this enormous amount of stuff. And all day long, I was trying to figure out, did you have a friend who went out with the truck to go get lunch and never came back? Because I could not imagine that there was any other way you could get this stuff to the racetrack in an NSX. And I say that because I stuffed all of my stuff into a Honda Fit and had probably about the same amount of stuff as you did. And I had a hard time figuring out how to get into a Honda Fit, and I got a whole hatchback with all this room in the back.
I mean, a Honda Fit is basically a clown car, right? There's an alternate dimension where all the stuff goes.
It could take a shocking amount of stuff in it, and I thought it was full. But so you had have the system to get your stuff to the car, to the track, and tell me how you. I mean, you didn't start with that. Did you autocross before the NSX?
Yes.
Okay.
So I've been autocrossing since, I want to say 2008 thereabouts.
Right.
So I've been in the game a little while. Started in old Honda Civics.
Okay.
Spent a few years in shifter carts, which was quite a jump from Honda Civics to shifter carts.
Yeah, I bet.
And that's really where I got kind of sucked into the national scene. There was a group of us in the Washington, D.C. region where I started.
Oh, really? Okay.
We were going to, any event within 5-6 hour drives, went to nationals together. It was just a whole band of crazy people, right? So that really got me sucked into the sport really deeply.
It's once you get in, man.
Oh, yeah.
You're so screwed.
It really is. It really is. I mean, it's a slippery slope, right? First, you start thinking about a second set of wheels and tires,
right?
And a sway bar here and there, and it just keeps going from there. So since then, I've driven just about anything. Had a couple Honda S2000s, RX-8, C5 Corvettes. I've been instructing in the San Diego region for, I want to say, 5 or 6 years. So I've gotten to drive quite a lot of things. So the NSX is really the last in a fairly long line of. In my life, it was one of the first dream cars I ever had.
Okay.
So, growing up, child of the 80s and 90s, everything was wedge-shaped supercar with pop-up headlights, right?
Right.
And the NSX made an impression. It was in the video games. It was, up on the bedroom poster for all those years. So I'm very grateful to finally be in the position and have the opportunity come up about 5 years ago to get one. And I was even more surprised, or delighted rather, that it was actually a good autocross car.
Yeah.
Driven a lot of things. When you play in this game long enough in autocross or tracks or whatever, you get to drive cars that have been prepped.
Sure.
And they spoil you because everything from the factory pales in comparison to something that's set up really well.
Right.
Right. And so there's times you hop in a new Porsche or BMW or something, and you're all excited, and it's like, it's kind of understeery. It doesn't really rotate.
Right.
It's not quite as sharp as this, 1989 CRX with, 500-pound springs and
right.
10 years of fussing with it. So my delight with the NSX was out of the box. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
Slow by today's standards, but just the way it drove was wow. They really knew what they were doing.
Right.
And that's what got me down the slippery slope of developing the car. I was like, okay, there's something here that's actually quite good. We just need to bring the performance level up to modern standards, and let's see how well it can do. Cue the last 3-4 years of throwing suspension and springs and aligning it every couple of weeks, and
so
slippery slope again.
Do you have to align it all the time, or is it because you're changing stuff around that you do it? Because I don't think it would fall out of alignment pretty quick, right?
No, it's actually been one of the most stable cars in terms of alignment that I've ever owned. So I've been doing my own alignments for about 10, 12 years because, again, when you get real deep in this, you kind of have to.
Right.
It gets very impractical to set up at an appointment and pay $150 every couple of weeks, right? So you
and
run a piece of string between two jack stands and figure it out.
And you have to, if you want to take it to a place, you have to go to find a place, a Pep Boys, or even a private person who kind of knows what they're doing. Because you're probably asking them to do stuff that's out of spec. And a lot of those alignment machines, I did some of that back in my earlier days, won't allow you to align, exceed whatever the manufacturer's specifications are. So you got to find somebody who's willing to either has a machine that can do it, or if they have one that can do it, is then willing to do it because there's always liability and a bunch of other BS that goes into it, right? So So at some point,
whole conversation about why.
Yeah, and it's no longer in warranty. My insurance company doesn't need to know about this.
Exactly.
All that other stuff. So
The other thing you figure out when you start doing it yourself is you can actually get much more precise than most of the machines.
Sure.
With just a piece of string and two jack stands, it'll take you forever, but you will get a degree of accuracy that the machines can't really replicate.
And it'll take you forever the first time, and then the more you do it, the less time it takes. Right.
Yes.
You're looking at me like
first dozen times.
Right. Exactly. It does. But it's a skill, and once you have the skill, especially when you're doing the same car over and over and over again.
Exactly. You learn the quirks of that chassis and what it wants to do, and how many times you should roll it back and forth before it takes a set. Right.
Yeah. The rolling it back and forth. I never wanted to. Once I got it right, I didn't want to roll it back and forth because if it was wrong, I'd have to do it again.
You'd rather not know.
I'd rather be ignorance is bliss. Why do I have to roll it back and forth? Oh, that's too funny. So you said is it for the XS class now? Is this car one of the front runners in this class on a typical day?
Locally, yes. Nationally, I was very encouraged too when I went out to nationals in September.
Right.
The times I was seeing, the car could almost get there.
Okay.
The driver let it down in a few places. I wasn't terribly disappointed. I felt I drove well for my level, but I think the car definitely has potential there. I think it has a few things going for it and a few things going against it. So one, it is very light. So the car as it is now sits at about 2660.
Right.
At race weight without driver.
Right.
And it still has air conditioning. So
nothing wrong with that. You had to, drive it back and forth to the racetrack in Southern California.
I value driver comfort. In a hot grid, blast the AC, let the driver cool down a little.
Oh, I thought only the old round guys did that. I thought I was the only one who was putting the AC on the grid. Thank you. I'm so glad.
So the car's pretty light.
Yeah.
I think it has fantastic geometry.
Okay.
Because it can't really fit that much tire. I only have a 235 tire up front.
Right.
But I think it uses that tire very efficiently.
Okay.
And so you'll hear me use it as an excuse of like, oh, I don't have enough front tire. But like in reality, I'm not dissatisfied with the level of front grip I have.
So you have a drawer labeled on your toolbox excuses?
No, that's in my back pocket.
Oh,
right?
okay.
Like, that's not going to be in the toolbox. You carry that with you. You might get caught, walking in paddock somewhere. Like you gotta have it ready.
I love it. So you mentioned starting with the CRX, right? Civics or CRX?
No, it was a Civic.
Okay,
I've driven
Civic.
some CRXs.
So back in the day, my dad was a CRX guy, and I've raced Civics, and so I'm a Honda guy, and you know Honda guys look at Acuras and say it's just a Honda. And for a lot of those cars, it is. The Integra, they're just Hondas with a little bit of different this or a little bit different that. The under the hood, the suspension, the way they work, all very much the same. Is there anything on the NSX that acts or looks at all like your Civics that you were running?
Yeah, so I think superficially there are some, there's like switch gears, your power windows, that stuff looks shared. I would say most of the car is pretty bespoke. So you don't see parts necessarily that are the same.
Okay.
But you do see a philosophy there, like a design philosophy of how they lay stuff out, how they organize things, what bolts they will choose to use in certain places.
Right.
That feels very familiar, right? Like you'll go in, and I haven't read the manual on how to take out the alternator or whatever, but I'll just grab a 14 millimeter and voila, look at it. It's laid out the same way it would be in any other Honda, even though no other Honda shares this particular arrangement.
Sure.
And I think that part I do really enjoy about working on the cars. You get to learn this side of it that's, under the skin a little.
Right.
You get to see that there's an attitude about how they designed it that does carry over from the other Hondas, right? And having had Civics and S2000s, you see there is a lineage there. Just really, really enjoyable.
So is it as easy to work on, although it's a different beast as the? Because that's the thing. I was considering the new club spec. I am considering the new club spec. And after wrenching on Hondas for 30 years, the idea of learning Mazda is, and everyone tells me it's not a big deal. They're equally simple, but they are different. I know what wrench to grab to do this job with a Honda. I would have to learn which wrench to grab to do the same job on a Mazda. And I just don't have a huge desire to do that. But it's hard for me to argue with Mazda's support of the club and all these different classes and the stuff that's out there for them. So is the NSX a big departure as far as the ease of working on it, even though it's very, very different?
I think there are some things where the mid-engine layout does make access more difficult.
Sure.
But as a whole, I do feel like one thing I appreciate as I turn more wrenches on it is they did think about the maintainability of it. That was something I felt like Honda really valued, certainly in those days.
Yeah.
They thought about how a mechanic is going to work on this, how maintainable it's going to be. And I think I see a lot of those in the details when I work on the NSX.
So it wasn't built by German
indentations in the body to allow you to swing a wrench. And you're like, there's no other reason for this little gap.
Right.
It is perfectly sized for the wrench. I'm going to have to sneak through this.
Sure.
And I think it's still a car made in 1990.
Yeah.
Right? So it is quite a bit simpler than a modern car.
Sure, sure.
The vehicle I had right before the NSX was a 2004 RX-8.
Okay.
And I think that was harder to work on. There was just more stuff.
Right.
That you had to peel back, and more components and more computers and electronics and things like that. So I think it's intimidating because of the value of the car and how hard it is to find parts. But yeah, it really does feel like a 90s Honda.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I have a friend who he's a Volkswagen guy, and the stuff I've helped him with his car, I just said to myself that the engineer who built this has never had to fix a car in their entire life. I do not. I have pudgy, small hands. I'm the guy that go to put their hand in a spot because my hand's the only one that fits. Okay.
No fit. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just I got tiny hands. And when my hand can't get to it, I am like, there's just no human possibility without like fabricating a tool to get to this spot.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I realized, oh yeah, that's what Snap-on makes $1 million for, or any of the tool truck guys. That they've made one tool to fit this bolt on this car, and they'd love to sell it to me for $195.
Yeah.
So.
I wouldn't blame only Snap. That is a very German sort of philosophy when it comes to their cars.
It's a German
right?
philosophy that Snap-on and Matco and all they take advantage of.
Take full advantage of it.
No question. No, I'm not blaming Snap-on. Snap-on's actually brilliant. If you're a mechanic who's got to do that work every day, that $195 tool is worth every single penny of it.
Yeah.
So it's not. God, yeah. I give those guys full credit for saying we're going to make a tool and make everybody's life easier. But for the guy who doesn't have to do that every day, you're like, gosh, why do I have to spend the money on this tool? Which is kind of funny. All right, so how about driving the thing? Is it as fun as it looks? Because it looks like a hoot.
It's awesome. So I think, and I had a bit of a journey with this because I did get a chance to drive a first generation NSX probably 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay.
And I kind of didn't like it. At the time, I was driving an S2000, and the NSX felt, it felt big. It felt heavy. The steering rack was really slow. Like it felt like a Civic steering rack. How many times you have to turn the wheel?
Yeah.
I'm like, this is still a dream car. I still want this, but maybe this is in addition to an autocross car, not the autocross car. And I feel like in retrospect, I wasn't a good enough driver to understand how the car wants to be driven.
Got it.
So the car really likes rotation. It doesn't like a lot of rotation. It will spin on you very quickly.
Right.
But when you get the back end moving, suddenly the really slow, heavy steering doesn't matter anymore.
Sure.
Right? Because you're just dancing around neutral and you're steering with your right foot. And the car does that so delightfully from the factory. You get into these beautiful 4-wheel neutral steer slides from Apex A. It's just the best feeling in the world.
Yeah.
And part of why I spend so much time working on the setup now is trying to replicate that.
Yeah.
Because as soon as I put on the big modern sticky tires, all of that disappears.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Now it's scraping the door handles, and now you have to change all the springs, and none of that handling. You're chasing that image of what Honda got right in terms of balance and how easy the car was to adjust.
Right.
But there's still moments, right? So there's moments where I can get the car into that state, and it's just you're on throttle so early, rotating through the whole corner without having to make a ton of corrections. It's beautiful. It's one of the best handling cars I've driven.
Yeah.
It's just tricky once you start messing with all the variables.
Sure. Is it pretty much a single gear autocross car? You've got one gear that you pop it into and go?
Yeah. So one of the big weaknesses with a stock car was the American version of the NSX had a 84 mile an hour second gear.
Ooh.
Which, when it makes 270 horsepower at the crank, it's just
right.
Not great.
No.
Not great. So it's had some transmission work to shorten all the gears down. It now tops out about 72, 73.
Okay.
Which is about perfect for autocross.
Sure.
Like I'll tap the limiter sometimes, but other than that, it's perfect. And the engine's torquey, so the low end, unlike most Hondas, it has some low end grunt.
Yeah.
And then it's got the legs up top. It's a pretty good spot right now.
Yeah. How much more development are you going to do on it? the million dollar question.
Well, it is an interesting question because I don't think I want to keep it going down this slippery slope too far. I don't want to make it an out-and-out race car.
Right.
Because I really enjoy driving on the street. I think it's comfortable. I think it's just a joy compared to a modern car, to just how tactile it is and how brilliant the gear shift is. I love driving on the street, so I don't want to, gut the thing and cage it and turn it into a race car.
Sure.
But I do think there's a couple major weaknesses left to address. First is power. It's making about 250 at the wheels now, and it's pretty fast, but
Yeah.
compared to the other monsters in Extreme Street, it's a little down on power. And then besides that, I think it's just continued iteration on the tire and the suspension and getting all that optimized. I think I'm getting pretty close on that.
So is the NSX like other Hondas where all the power's in the head?
That's a great question. Yes and no. So I think the general consensus is naturally aspirated. Honda got basically everything you're gonna get out of it. And you really just need to go to forced induction at that point, or down crazy street and like stroke the engine, start messing with the internals.
Right.
But the heads flow extremely well from the factory. I don't think it's quite at the level as like a modern K series, right? But for what it is.
For a 1990s car.
Yeah, for 1990s, that's for sure.
Yeah. So if you were to go and play, would it be forced induction? Is that the next step?
Yes.
Okay.
So I have a couple secret projects in the works. We'll see if they succeed. I don't want to talk about them until they do. Let's fail in secret.
Oh no, I understand that one. How does that work on a mid-engine car? Where do you force the induction from?
So in the early 90s, Comtech actually made a kit, which other kits started to model on. You just drop a blower on top, right? It's just like an old V8, right?
Okay.
You just put a root style blower on top of the intake manifold and run a belt to it and you're good to go.
Okay. So not too easy or not too difficult.
No.
In the grand scheme of the world.
Yeah, of all the crazy things you could do with a car.
Yeah. You could drop a LS3 Corvette motor in it.
I mean, the easy button really is a K series swap.
Okay.
Right. Like a 4-cylinder K series can actually make more power than this V6.
Okay.
Right. And that just speaks to just how far developed the K was as a Honda engine, right?
Yeah.
It's like it really is one of the best engines ever made, in my opinion. Like that's the easiest way to do it. I'd lose weight as well.
Yeah. And because it's a smaller footprint, right? It's just the whole thing smaller.
Mm-hmm. It's smaller, it's less weight, makes more power, is more efficient, and you can turbo them to the moon.
Makes it easier to work on them because you've got more room in that engine bay.
It may.
Yeah.
But for the moment, it's there is some emotional affection to that V6, that very special engine that Honda put so much work into, and how it fits with the car. And the fact is, I don't think I need 500 horsepower.
Right.
The car's pretty fast. Their philosophy when they made it was to keep the whole package balanced. And I agree with that. I think if it just has an extra 100 horsepower, that'd probably be good enough.
Yeah. So, and the other part is, I always struggle with this idea of, do you buy a piece for a class or do you run what you love?
Mm-hmm.
And none of us are getting rich doing this. There's no world championships. There's no $1 million prize at the end of solo nationals. We would love to have the jacket and the trophy and all of that kind of stuff. But there's something to be said to run what you love, and you clearly have a place in your heart for this car in somewhat, to run it somewhat in the way it was designed from the factory.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the appeals of the Extreme Street category.
Yeah.
Right. It is such an open rule book that there's no jacket. None of us are taking it that seriously, right? But there's so much freedom in the rule set that you can just pick something that you love, and you don't have to make excuses for it anymore. Right. You just invest as much or as little as you want. Sure. And for me, I do love this car. Again, it was childhood bedroom poster. I thought I had missed my chance too with the prices skyrocketing, right? And I just lucked into this deal. And it would be such a shame to not run it, right? And the more I drive it and the more I learn about how it wants to be driven, the more I even appreciate, what the designers did and what the car is.
Right.
And it's, I think I've taken it in its development further than I would any other car because I love it.
Right. Right.
Right. There's times where I was talking about how it's easy to work on. I think some of that is going to be rose-colored glasses.
Right.
Right. Because there are times where I'm on my back in the garage, swearing at the thing, just like
Sure.
any other car. Right. But because I love the car so much and I love what I can do with it,
sure,
you kind of forget about that.
Right. And it sounds like from what you're saying, you also don't think you've really driven it to its full potential yet.
Correct.
So you've got some
moments.
Personal learning left to do.
Yes.
Which is also part of the challenge.
Yeah, and it's one of the more I think it's one of the more rewarding things. I think that's something that I missed when I was doing karts that I get when I run cars.
Right.
A kart feels like a piece of equipment.
Sure.
Right. And in that way, it feels almost like a much more raw representation of who you are as a driver, because it's just a direct translation of the things that you do. A car feels like an animal.
Right.
Right. It feels like a thing that you develop a relationship with.
Right.
Because there's things about you can't change.
Right. Right.
And there's things that you ask it to do that it doesn't want to do. And you have to learn how to work with it as a partner.
Right.
And to do that with your dream car is just a magnificent experience.
Well, and with a kart, it's pretty clear for every particular kart what you need to make the kart itself its best. Those are all really sorted. You go to the Tony kart, there is the hot setup, this, and you know what it is. And then it's really all about the driver. Whereas with any car, there's a lot more variable to it that you can throw into it. There's very few cars that just are perfectly sorted when you get them, and so that's, I think the karts are an interesting. I love watching them, but they're almost like a spec class, because you know exactly what you need to do to make the kart as good as it can be, and then you just have to work on yourself until you get yourself there.
I think I would agree with that philosophically. I think in practice it's still complex enough that very few of us, truly optimize the setups.
I can hear Lefty yelling at me through the TV right now, by the way.
It's a little harder than we're making it.
I'm waiting for a text message from Lefty like, what are you talking about?
Right. So I think there is definitely that depth there.
Yeah.
I just never felt that connection with the vehicle as if it were like a separate thing that I need to have a relationship with.
Right.
And I think that's what's so intriguing about some cars, and that's what I'm enjoying so much about this car.
Yeah. No one's putting a shifter cart on their wall as on a poster at age 13 going, this is what I want to drive for the rest of my life.
I might be with you on that one.
Yeah. Nothing against shifter carts, but there's definitely.
Now, if I had one last autocross run, it'd be in a shifter cart for sure.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
But if I have to live with something, it's not a cart.
Yes, that's true. That is true. All right, so let's move on to the real reason I brought you onto the show. I was really, when I decided to go to nationals this year, and I was told in no uncertain terms that I had to compete, because I didn't plan to.
Yes.
When I decided to go, I'm like, we're just going to come to the podcast and have a good time, and like we do at the runoffs. And I don't know who the first person was. It might have been Lefty, or it might have been Hayward. And like, well, if you're going to go, you got to drive. I'm like, I don't have a car to drive. He goes, sure you do. Every car can be driven here. I'm like, I have a Honda Fit, and it's an automatic, and it's the CVT, and it is the worst. It must have. I'm going to say it because I was last in the slowest class in the whole competition. It is the worst car that was at the run, or that at Solo Nationals by far. It was the slowest car, and it has drum brakes in the back, a CVT transmission. A guy who's 100 pounds heavier than he should be, on not the best tires. I had everything wrong, but I had a good time. But when I decided to go out there,
and you made it home.
I did.
I'm sure there's some prepped car that had to be pushed onto a trailer, not on its own power.
Although I will tell you that coming home, I went the southern route. We can talk about this too. Mm-hmm. Coming home, I took the northern route because it was a little faster. And coming down the hill through the Rockies, I overcooked the front brakes. I still had my autocross. They're made for street. I still have them on the car now.
Yes.
They're not. They weren't like race only brakes. But clearly they weren't made with all of the weight I had in that car to go downhill at 70 miles an hour, slowing down to 50 every now and then. And they started making a noise like I had a flat tire, and I couldn't understand it. And I got out,
wow.
all the tires fully filled, and I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. So I literally had to coast down almost the rest of the hill and really slow. I felt I had semis going past me because they were able to go down the hill faster than I was.
Yeah.
And then they cooled off, and I've never had that problem again, so I don't understand it. But anyway, but I did make it home. That was my wife said, you've got two goals at Solo Nationals.
Yes.
Get there and get home with a car that has
funny. Those are my goals too.
Exactly. With a car that still has 4 wheels on it, that has not been on its lid. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I think that's a good goal. So, but when I started planning this, I'm like, okay, I have to get my set of wheels. I've got to get all my tools. I've got to get my clothes, and I've got to bring all the podcast stuff, which is 2 or 3 cases and a tripod, and it's not an insignificant amount of stuff. And I'm trying to figure out how am I going. And that car was literally, I had a little gap in the top where I could get a view out the rearview mirror. I was loaded to the brim. And nobody could sit next to me. I could not have had a passenger going back and forth.
Yeah.
Because my cooler was on the front floor of the car next to me. So you, my friend, though, I'm gonna start with the picture. I'm gonna call it up here.
And in my little S2000 at the time, I took this route through the Rockies that was one of the most beautiful drives I've ever done.
Sure.
It's the $1 Million Highway, if you know what that is.
Right.
Between Ray Silverton. Absolutely gorgeous. And so I was like, hey, if I'm going back out there, let me take the same route the other way. So went through, went through Arizona, New Mexico, down into, I think, Durango, Colorado is kind of where we start hitting the Rockies.
Okay.
And then went up north, up that same route. Timed it perfectly for the sun coming down.
Nice.
It's just gorgeous. One of the most beautiful drives ever. Actually, I take it back. The most beautiful drive I've ever done.
Cool.
You know, in this beloved car of mine. It was quite a romantic moment.
Yeah. So we just started looking at the video here, and I saw this on your either YouTube or Facebook or whatever it was, and I was like, why am I watching this? I'm like 7 minutes in. I'm like, why am I still watching this? I'm like 12 minutes in. It's
oddly mesmerizing.
It is really, really cool. Yeah, it's just a lot of fun. So how many days did you take to get out there?
3 days, 2 nights.
Okay.
So I had one quick stop in Phoenix just to make an easy first day, and it felt smart to shake everything down, and still be in civilization.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And the day 2 was the big one, all the way through the Rockies.
Yeah.
Stopped just outside Denver.
Okay.
And the last day into Lincoln was nice and easy.
Yeah.
Like just 8 hours or so on the last day.
Yeah. So going out, I made it to, because I left after work on Friday, and I made it to Kingman on Kingman the first night. Went through a hellacious windstorm just outside of Arizona. I mean, there were trucks pulling over, and it was, and no rain, just straight line winds. It was
just
nuts.
Wind. Wow.
It was just nuts. And I got out. I tried to take a video at the gas station while I was pumping, and you could see my hair flying, but you couldn't hear me saying anything because the wind was so loud. It was overpowering the phone. It was crazy. And then the second night, I decided to go all the way out into New Mexico and then up through Oklahoma and Kansas, or into Texas, I guess, and then up north.
Yeah.
And because I'd never been that way before, and I just wanted to kind of see that part of the country, and it reminded me a lot. I grew up in Wisconsin, of farm country in Wisconsin. It was just miles and miles and miles of farm country, which is cool. And I ran in a little tiny town in Oklahoma. I'm at a stoplight, and this truck pulls up next to me and starts honking its horn, and I'm like, oh no, what's wrong with my car? And I rolled down the window, and the guy was running with us in Lincoln, saw the Inside the SCCA bumper sticker on the back of the car. We pulled over, chatted for a few minutes, and we ended up staying in the same hotel that night in Kansas, and had dinner together, and really nice couple. And just met him on the side of a road in a little tiny 2-lane highway in Oklahoma. I'm like, this guy's going to pull out a shotgun and I'm dead. He sees a California license plate and he's like, I'm going to take care of the guy from California. No, just the nicest people. And then I came back out. I went all the way through to somewhere in whatever the last city in Colorado is on the way home. I made it there the first night. Is it not Grand Junction? Maybe it is Grand Junction.
Grand Junction is...
It's on 80.
I feel like it's on the other side of the Rockies.
It is.
It's
like it's right on the border. It's like the last town before you get to Utah. So I made it there the first night, and then made it home the second night because I had to make it home in 2 nights. And oddly, that was a better trip. Two 10.5, 11-hour days was better than the 14-hour day I did in the middle, trying to make the last day into Lincoln an easy day. I'm not going to do a 14-hour day again. That was just stupid. So did you have any challenges once everything got out there? You had the stuff on the back and any challenges?
For the most part, no. So I had been testing the setup throughout the year.
Right, because I saw it first at Lake Elsinore.
Exactly. Right. So locally, I don't really need to do that, but I wanted to, validate everything. It's my own handiwork, so I don't trust anything. And I want to put a lot of miles on. I mean, that is actually part of why I do like driving the car. It's even at such a high level of prep. There's a lot of testing and validation if you just drive it all the time.
Yeah.
Right. You could encounter the failures in less critical situations.
Right.
Right. So everything had held up pretty well because, I had worked out how I was tying everything down. I had worked out, how to distribute the weight, how to load and unload the thing. So by the time nationals rolled around, that part of it was fairly routine. What I did have issues with was I had recently, I think a month before nationals, went to a standalone engine management for the purpose of running E85. So the tune was, it was great for like racing, but like all the other stuff needed some time to work out the quirks, right? And something that I had not thought about, being that I live in Southern California, was altitude.
Sure, yeah.
So as I was heading into the Rockies, the last fuel stop, filled up the car, went in, crank, no start. Crank, no start. And there's a line forming behind me. So it's like wonderful. Right? So I barely managed to get the thing kind of just bump started out of the way, pulled over to the side. And, there I am in the middle of Colorado with my laptop out trying to figure out if the thing went at more fuel or less fuel.
Sure. So did you put a different management on it on the way home, knowing that you were going to be having to deal with that?
Yeah, actually, throughout that whole week in Lincoln, every time I started the car, I was rolling data and trying to adjust based off of that. To this day, I'm still doing that. It's just, it gives you an appreciation for what the OEMs do.
Sure.
Right? All the different conditions the car is in, and it just fires up all the time.
Right.
When you're responsible for the tune, you realize that, all the temperature changes and the ethanol content changes and the barometric pressure, all of that stuff matters.
Yeah. I'm still mesmerized by your video. We're in the Rockies now.
I will admit there are times where I'm working and I just throw it on in the background and just glance over at it every so often.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. Yeah. So, are you going to go back to nationals this year?
Yes.
Are you going to do it the same way?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love driving the car.
Yeah.
I'm a romantic about what the car means, to people, right? And the freedom it gives you. And there's something about driving it and not having to build infrastructure around it.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
That still gives me that emotional connection. And it's, the car would be faster if I trailered it, but.
Yeah. So I see you stopping at gas stations on your video. What was that conversation starter like when you're sitting at there pumping gas?
Oh boy, there's a conversation every gas station.
Of course.
Every time you stop, there's a conversation. Everybody loves it.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about it where it's like, it just looks so stupid and crazy.
It does.
That, you don't get any of the like, oh, look who's this guy in this fancy sports car.
Yeah.
It's like, what the hell are you doing? And it's covered in bugs and what is going on here?
Now, you made the rack, right?
Yes.
And it's the different.
As you might imagine, the market for this type of product doesn't really exist.
It's pretty niche.
Yes.
So it's the stuff that you just can bolt it together with the corner brackets, right? And then
the extruded 80/20 stuff.
And you used suction cups.
Yeah. So I used C suckers up front. There's 2 of them in the front. Each can support, I think, 150 pounds. So there's quite a lot of safety margin built in. So that just rests on the trunk, and the back clamps to the wing. So clamps to the wing uprights.
Got it. Okay.
So it uses like stage lighting clamps, and I 3D printed some adapters, and it just quick release clamps to the wing. So the wing's primary purpose is actually to support the rest of the rack.
It doesn't do anything for you at the autocross.
The secondary purpose is to look cool, and the tertiary is like, there's a little bit of downforce.
A little bit of downforce. Yeah. Yeah, because I had thought about adding stuff to the fit to get some more space, and the 2 options that I'd come up with was a receiver hitch with a little basket in the back would be one thing that I could put all of my stuff that could get wet, or one of those cargo things across
cargo
the top,
carrier, pod
with
things,
with the roof rack kind of thing. And although I think I'm gonna,
I might add one of those to the setup,
the roof rack,
and extend the rack a little, and then have a couple of suction cups on the roof, and have a pod up there. And just bring a little bit more. I think the obvious question really is like, why not just get a little trailer?
Could you tow a trailer behind it? I mean, you're not in warranty anymore, so you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah. The complications is the car's all aluminum.
Okay.
So welding stuff is almost
right.
just kind of a no-go, and so then you're in cutting and bolting stuff.
And I don't think Reese Hitch made a, like you said, this is not a market for putting hitches in the back of an NSX.
Right. So you'd have to fabricate one, which is not the biggest deal. I just don't like towing small trailers.
Yeah.
I did that when I was in karts. They're just a bit of a pain. It feels almost as much of a hassle as a big truck and a big trailer.
Right. Well, and there's some safety considerations with that. They're hard to see from other cars. Other cars aren't expecting a trailer on the back of an NSX. Yes. So they might try to sneak in behind you real quick as you're going past them, and then realize, oh crap, there's something I can't be sneaking in behind you. So I can get that being a problem, or at least a consideration as well. So well, I got to tell you, Edwin, like I said, when I first saw you at that first autocross and all of this stuff, and I was like, I don't understand. I was literally scratching my head. I don't understand. Where is his friend with the pickup truck, or where is his pickup truck? Or I thought maybe the pickup truck was like, you dropped your stuff and then you drove the pickup truck elsewhere in the parking lot so people could have
parked it away.
Yeah. And then at the end,
no, I'm not that courteous.
Well, most of us aren't, but I don't know you well enough. Maybe you're the nicest guy who's ever been to a racetrack. But and then when we were done, and it was like 108 degrees that day.
It was a hot day.
Oh, it was brutal. And I'm taking my time putting my stuff in the back of my car, and I'm like, is that all going? That can't be all. Oh my gosh, all that stuff's gonna go. It's all on the back of that car. That's literally how my brain was working, watching you get yourself put together. And that's why I think when I walked over and introduced myself and said, "You're nuts."
Yeah, I remember. Yep.
But now I understand the method to your madness. You wanted to go to Lincoln, and you needed a way to do it. And I just love the ingenuity of people who do what we do. And when you really want to find a way to get it done, you just find a way to get it done. So,
and I do love that about this community, where there's a lot of people doing crazy things, and then when you talk to them, it's like, oh, I understand that reasoning.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny.
Anywhere else in life, it would make no sense.
I bet you nobody at Lincoln questioned you once when you came through. Like, that makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. Exactly. And I probably should have never questioned you either when I saw you at Lake Elsinore, but because it was just so absurd. But then when it was done, it made perfect sense. When you had it all put together, if I had seen you roll in that way, then it would have been like, okay. But I just couldn't conceptualize in my brain how all that stuff was going to end up however. And then when you got it done, I'm like, oh my God, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So I'm going to put the picture back up one more time here.
Huge supporter of the car. It's been at their shop even before my ownership, so they've taken care of me with a lot of shop time, letting me use their equipment, putting it up on racks, all the alignments I like to do. So big shout out to them. Other than that, I almost want to shout out like everybody in the SCCA that I know and I love, the local San Diego region, that this little family of wackos doing all this nonsense and helping each other support our crazy endeavors that we can't explain to anyone else.
No, we can't.
And just the joy of going to nationals and being amongst 1,400 of those people was lovely. If I want to leave it on anything, I would just encourage anybody listening to this, come out and play. Right? It's such an awesome community. To have this kind of conversation where we're geeking out about stuff like the NSX and like the crazy things I'm doing about it, you can't have that anywhere else.
Yeah, we just spent 52 minutes talking about your NSX and then your crazy setup to get you back and forth to nationals. Where else will you do that, right?
And I think it's such a great community that we can all have such different walks of life. We all have different cars. We like different things, but we can all come together and understand each other through this this weird, wacky sport.
Yeah.
And I just love it.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun.
And I'm grateful to be a part of it.
Thank you, Edwin, for joining me today. Had a blast, and I look forward to seeing you at a couple autocrosses here in Southern California, and then I have every intention to go back to Lincoln this year, so maybe I'll follow you out this time.
Awesome. 100%. We can convoy up there.
There you go. All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Inside the SCCA. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to the RacingWire Podcast Network, also the Racing Network on YouTube, so you won't miss any episodes. It'd also be great if you leave a comment, especially if it's a good one. You can follow us on social media to find out who our next guests are and leave questions. On Twitter, it's @RacingWireNet. There's a new Inside the SCCA every week. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have a fantastic weekend, and go play with cars.
I'm Abby Shear, and when I'm on my way to an autocross, I listen to the Inside the SCCA podcast.
Inside the SCCA is a presentation of the RacingWire Podcast Network and Rural 15 Productions.